The title of today's Bible study is They First Took Their Journey. They first took their journey, taken from Numbers chapter 10, verses 11 to 36. And we have two thoughts: the command to move forward, the faith to follow as God leads the way. When all the preparations for a journey is done, the journey must finally begin. The people of Israel have been given the law at Mount Sinai. They were also instructed to construct the tabernacle, wherein lies the presence of God. The tabernacle has now been completed and inaugurated. God was their leader. Israel will be a theocratic nation. In other words, the word means God rules. By the cloud and fire and by the silver trumpets, right? We saw over the last 2 weeks how God's command to move, to stop, will be effected by the cloud and the fire, and also by the silver trumpets. Israel will be directed all the way to the promised land. As believers, we are on the journey to heaven, our promised land. And we thank God that He leads us in our pilgrimage, wilderness travel in this world, until we reach our eternal home. Edward Donnelly, he observed well. He says, heaven is the arena of glory. That is why God created the heavens and the earth. It was a universe of stunning variety and richness. The man and the woman were God's splendid image bearers, the Lord walking with them in unbroken fellowship in the garden in the cool of the day, all reflected the excellencies of God, the glory of God shone forth. It was all very good. So that was paradise when God first placed Adam and Eve in the garden. There was no sin at that time. God's glory diminished. This blessed state, we said, but this blessed state of affairs did not continue. The devil tempted Adam and Eve, and they listened. They disobeyed God. They fell from their high position, and the brightness of His image in them was tarnished. Human beings were separated from God. Death entered the world. God cursed the earth and its creatures. Paul tells us that the creation was subjected to futility, to the bondage of corruption. Romans 8:20-21. God's glory was diminished in the world that He made. What a tragedy. God created this earth and its inhabitants for His glory, but just a few chapters later in Genesis, we read that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. The earth was corrupt before God, and the earth was filled with violence. Genesis 6 verse 5 and verse 11. These are heartbreaking words. A tidal wave of sin and misery is engulfing creation. But the most terrible of the fall is not what it did to us or to the earth, but what it did to the handiwork of God, the havoc it wreaked in the theater of God's glory. And so you see, when all this fallenness came, God first sent the flood. But after the flood, you saw men again could not hold themselves together. And that's where God began by His infinite wisdom, a plan conceived before the foundations of the world, that He will choose one man, Abraham, to begin the nation of Israel. That was Genesis chapter 12. And you would see, you remember, if you recall, 2 years ago, we had our church camp. And in our camp, we spoke concerning prophecies on Israel. The prophecy of God concerning the nation of Israel, why God began this nation of Israel. And you recall we drew some charts to help us to see how God formed the nation of Israel. It was for the purpose of bringing a semblance of heaven back on earth. So the building of the tabernacle itself was a semblance of a place where there is no, sin was dealt with. Right? They had the sacrificial system that was enacted in order that sins could be atoned for. Right? And there, in the presence of a holy God, Israel will receive the blessing of God as they begin this journey as a nation. So the first thought, the command to move forward. It came to pass, verse 1 of our text tells us, on the 20th day of the second month, in the second year, that the cloud was taken up from off the tabernacle of the testimony. And the children of Israel took their journeys out of the wilderness of Sinai, and the cloud rested in the wilderness of Paran, and they first took their journey according to the commandment of the Lord by the hand of Moses. So you see, they began their journey, and it's interesting that you notice that in the way God organized them, it was in a military fashion, because the Lord has instructed, right, that they would move according to the armies by their tribes. So God has, you recall when we begin the book, He has numbered the people, and He has also arranged the various tribes and the men of age that would form the first standing army of Israel. They are going to do battle. In other words, there will be enemies that will come along the way in their journey. And Israel had to prepare themselves in order to encounter and to take on the enemies in battle. And therefore, God set them in formation. Right? Each tribe had their leader, and the name of their leader was named. And you would see also the Levites, how they were involved in charge. Verse 21, the Kohathites set forward bearing the sanctuary, and the others set up the tabernacle against they came. So there were those, the Levites, who were in charge of the rearing, right, and the breaking down of camp when the cloud, according to the instruction of the cloud and the fire, that would signal to them. Right? So if the cloud resides in the camp, then they would stop. The trumpet would sound. But if the cloud goes up, they would all see it, and then they will wait for the signal of the trumpet. Once the silver trumpet sounds, one sound, two sound, they would move forward. And this was what we would see. Right? Ian Dugat, he says, observe that at the outset, Israel understood that the wilderness life is a life of God-centered pilgrimage. Right? Our life on this earth is a pilgrimage. Right? Peter says, described to us, that we are on this journey to heaven. This world is like the wilderness, a wilderness travel. But God leads us. Although we are in barren land, as it were. We are in enemy territory. There is deadness, but there is death. There is danger, but also there is comfort, because God was with the people of Israel. And he says also that the Israelites also understood that the wilderness life is a life of constant warfare that can only be won in God's strength. So we are engaged in warfare and in spiritual battle only by the strength of the Spirit of God, by the strength of the sword of the Word, sword of the Spirit, which is the Word of God, to help us to defeat our enemies. And here you would see the people of God thus must be equipped for warfare. And this is evident even in the ordering of the march. The Israelites were arranged by military divisions under their various tribal standards, as if marching out to war. Right? That's what we see in verse 12 to 28. When God leads, we find our journey blessed. He shows the way. We can rely upon Him to lead. He sees the way ahead, which we cannot. Right? Can you tell what will unfold in a new day? You can't tell what will unfold in a new day. But if you go in the strength of the Lord, then you know that you have committed your life to Him. He will take care of you. Therefore, you have a confidence. Right? There is a restfulness in your heart. You're not palpitating all the time, but you are restful. As such, He gives the command to move, and we understand that it is for our good and for His glory. As such, we follow. So, the hymn 323 is a good hymn to help us to learn, right, how we can follow God in a very practical way. Right? When we walk with the Lord in the light of His Word, it is through His Word that He leads us. What a glory He sheds on our way. While we do His good will, He abides with us still, and with all who will trust and obey. Trust and obey, for there is no other way to be happy in Jesus but to trust and obey. Not a shadow can rise, not a cloud in the skies, but His smile quickly drives it away. Not a doubt, nor a fear, not a sign, nor a tear can abide while we trust and obey. So while we bring our petitions to God, right, we can cry out to God in prayer. Joy comes in the morning. Right? He comforts our heart. He strengthens us, and He wipes our tears, and He gives us strength and comfort so that we may, by His strength, move forward. Right? Not a burden we bear, not a sorrow we share, but our toil He doth richly repay. Not a grief nor a loss, not a frown nor a cross, but is blessed if we trust and obey. But we never can prove the delights of His love until all on the altar we lay. For the favor He shows and the joy He bestows are for them who will trust and obey. So Israel will begin this journey, and it is a blessed journey, and God's plan is this, that they will be a blessed nation. Right? They will be a nation amongst all the nations, but a nation whereby the name of God will be exalted. And how can the name of God be exalted? It is when they would follow the Lord. Then in fellowship sweet we will sit at His feet, or will walk by His side in the way. What he says we will do, where he sends we will go. Never fear, only trust and obey. So we thank the Lord that he gives us the command as we wait upon him in his word to guide us and to lead us. And when God gives the signal, what must we do? Well, the faith to follow as he leads the way. Moses said unto Hobab, verse 29, our second thought in page 4 of your notes. Raguel, the Midianite, Moses' father-in-law, he says, we are journeying unto a place of which the Lord said, I will give it you. Come thou with us, and we will do thee good. For the Lord has spoken good concerning Israel. So this man is the brother-in-law of Moses. Right? It seemed that Jethro, the father-in-law, has died. So he is the son, right? The brother-in-law, the son of Raguel, okay? Also known as Ruel or Jethro. And it is likely that Jethro is now dead, and Hobab was the head of the family when Wilsby observed. He says, Moses wanted his in-laws to travel with Israel and enjoy the blessings God had with his people. But Hobab declined the offer. He declined. He preferred to stay on his own land with his own people. Why should we sacrifice comfort and security for an unknown future? You follow God, you take away all your idols. What security do I have? Well, all the comforts you would need. You would notice verse 30, it says, and he said unto him, I will not go, but I will depart to my own land and to my own kindred. And he said, leave us not, I pray thee. That's Moses pleading with Hobab. Leave us not, I pray thee, for as much as thou knewest how we are encamped in the wilderness, and thou mayest be to us instead of eyes. Well, they were very familiar with the terrain there in the wilderness, and therefore Hobab would be a good an asset to Israel, right? If they would be willing to stay. And then Moses said, it shall be, if thou goest with us, yea, it shall be that what goodness the Lord shall do unto us, the same will we do unto thee. So when they would be willing to follow the Lord, the blessing of God would be also upon them. And they departed from the mount of the Lord, 3 days' journey, and the ark of the covenant went with them to search a resting place for them. You notice that Hobab, after this friendly encouragement and exhortation, agreed. You would see in Judges 1 verse 16 and 4 verse 11 how later on they dwelt in the promised land. Okay, they hearkened to the persuasion of Moses to follow the people of Israel. And verse 34, and the cloud of the Lord was upon them by day when they went out of the camp, and it came to pass when the ark set forward that Moses said, rise up, Lord, let thy enemies be scattered, and let them that hate thee flee before thee. The journey would also involve battles along the way. There will be enemies, but God's promise is that he will be there for them. The Lord knows, and he takes care of them. When the people of God would be willing to take God as their shield, happy art thou, O Israel, who is like unto thee, O people saved by the Lord, the shield of thy help, who is the sword of thy excellency, and thy enemies shall be found liars unto thee, and thou shalt tread upon their high places. The way with God is a blessed journey. Our concluding thought. May the Lord help us to press on. Amen.